Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Chimera's Core studio. Welcome to the show. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Eric, who's been supporting this channel as a general tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Eric, so again, Eric, thank you so much. And actually, on today's episode, Eric's gonna handle the intro for me.
Hey Mitch, this is Eric from Manhattan, Kansas. For my deck tech, I would like to see you build around Jared Carthalion, the Rainbow Planeswalker, focusing on alternate win conditions like Happily Ever After and a sub-theme of +1/+1 counters. Thanks.
So, like Eric said, today's episode's going to be on Jared Carthalion, focusing on some alternative win conditions with some ++1 counters sprinkled in there. Jared Carthalion is a 5 loyalty planeswalker that costs Wooburg and has +1, creating 3/3 Kavu creature token with trample that's all colors. -3, choose up to 2 target creatures, for each of them put a number of counters on it equal to the number of colors it is. And -6, return target multicolored card from your graveyard to your hand. If that card was all colors, draw a card and create 2 treasure tokens. So Jared is a very spicy planeswalker that can make an army of Kavu that you can also make pretty massive because, again, those Kavu are all 5 colors, and when you get counters on them with Jared, you're getting 5 counters on at a time. And of course, since Jared is all 5 colors itself, well, it gives you access to all these spicy alternative win conditions that you could want. And yes, one of those alternative win conditions that we are going to focus this deck on is Happily Ever After, which of course works very well with that +1. And to demonstrate that, well, let's, of course, move on to the Golden Pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Happily Ever After. Go figure. It's an enchantment for 2 and a white that has, when it enters the battlefield, each player gains 5 life and draws a card. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, there are 6 or more card types among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard, and your life total is greater than or equal to your starting life total, you win the game. So this is a very off-the-wall alternative win condition that has a lot of requirements, but again, our commander can definitely help out with some of its aspects. First up, again, Happily Ever After helps us itself when it comes into play by having everyone gain 5 life and draw a card. And obviously that helps us with one of the aspects of actually needing more life or the exact same amount as our starting life total. But of course, our commander can help us with that first part, because if there are 5 colors among permanents we control, that's one of them, and yeah, again, Jared can very easily make us a Kavu that is all 5 colors. And also by making that Kavu and it actually being a Planeswalker, well, that can help get essentially half of the other requirement done. Which, of course, is if there are 6 or more card types among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard. Because, of course, Happily Ever After itself is an enchantment, our commander is a Planeswalker that can also, again, make Kavu. And yeah, that's 3 of them. I mean, obviously, again, lands are essentially just going to be counted anyways because we're going to need to play lands in this game. So that's 4 of the 6 right there. And of course, those other 2, oh, well, I mean, we can have 2 out of 3, right? Artifact can actually be pretty easily done as well. We'll talk about some great examples here in a bit. But yeah, if we just cast some instant sorceries, those are going to be in our graveyard, and yeah, we can very easily meet that requirement. So all these requirements can be met, and as long as we can keep this on the field until our next upkeep, and we keep, having those requirements met at the time, we win. So yeah, again, this entire deck is basically built around a spicy alternative win condition like this one, so yeah, it is definitely the Golden Pig. But actually, it's not our only alternative win condition. Because our other spicy way to win is with Miles Aria. It's an enchantment for red, green, white that says a lot of things, so here we go. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1 counter on each creature you control if you control a creature with power 5 or greater. Then you gain 10 life if you control a creature with power 10 or greater. Then you win the game if you control a creature with power 20 or greater. Again, Jared can easily get out some Kavu that can make absolutely massive because it can get 5 counters on them at a time. So we can definitely meet some of those power requirements throughout the game. I mean, obviously that first one can just help grow those Kavu as well, which is great. And of course, on top of that, we can actually gain life with this too pretty easily, which of course can help us with our other alternative win condition too. But yeah, as long as we can keep this on the field and we can make one of our Kavu into a massive 20 power threat, or some other threats we'll talk about here in a bit, we can just win with this. But before we jump into the other cards on this episode, I just want to mention that every single card in this deck, including the commander itself, are less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly build. On top of that, as I go through the cards on this episode, I'm going to be breaking things down in different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. And if you are interested in this deck, make sure you check out that deck list link in the description below. And now with all that said, let's jump into those other cards. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Moving on, we also have another great turn 1 player Search for Norwich, which has to spend 2 for a green, and we get a basic into play untapped, and then Fauna Fertility, which is basically an enchantment version of Wayfarer's Bauble. And speaking of enchantments, next up there's Druid Class, which is going to gain us life when lands come into play, but more importantly, at level 2, it lets us play additional lands each of our turns. Moving on, another great turn 2 play is Rampant Growth, which gets a basic into play tapped, and Edge Bottom, which does the exact same thing. We've got 4 fewer lands, and we can also cycle it away by sacrificing a land. And then Cultivate's going to get us 2 lands. One of those basics goes into play tapped, and 1 goes into our hand. Speaking of 2 lands, we also have Springbloom Druid, which is going to make us sacrifice 1 land to get 2 into play tapped. And then Harrow does the exact same thing but at instant speed, and those lands come into play untapped. We can get even more lands with Nissa's Renewal, which is going to have us go get 3 basics into play tapped, and we also gain 7 life. So again, that can contribute to our win with Happily Ever After. Speaking of which, we also have some artifacts that can contribute as well, like Arcane Signet, which can of course tap for any of our colors, Burnished Heart, which we can pay 3 to sacrifice to get 2 basics into play tapped, and Solemn Simulacrum, which gets us a land when it comes into play. That land comes into play tapped, and when it dies, we draw a card. Regardless, again, Happily Ever After can count these artifacts even if they are in our graveyard, so keep that in mind. But of course, we've got some other things to keep in mind as well. Like, the fact that having some tutors can be a great way to get those alternative win conditions for us, like, Diabolic Tutor, which can go get any of our cards in our deck and put it directly into our hand. So yeah, probably Happily Ever After. And then Razcast Right might cost 1 more to actually do the exact same thing, but we can also have the flexibility to cycle this away for just a single mana. Raz Illicit Shipment has Casualty 3, so we can sacrifice a creature with power 3 or greater to copy this spell, and when we do, we get 2 cards into our hand out of our library. Moving on though, how about Mythos of Brokos, which if we pay blue and black when we cast this spell, we search our library for a card, put that card in our graveyard, then shuffle our library, and of course we get that card right back because we can return up to 2 permanent cards per our graveyard to our hand. In a more specific way though, we've got Moonblast Cleric, which has when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, shuffle your library, then put that card on top. So yeah, we can set ourselves up to get one of those 2 enchantment alternative win conditions. Or we can go get both of them with Plea for Guidance, which lets us search our library for 2 enchantment cards, reveal them, put them in our hand, then shuffle. Not that we need to go get both, we've got some options, but yeah, we're definitely going to be getting Happily Ever After most likely with one of those 2 choices. And speaking of choices, well, we also have some Transmute cards that can help us out as well, Drift to Phantasms and Perplex. Each of these can be transmuted for 3 mana, and when we do so, we discard them and go get any card in our library that's got a converted mana cost of 3 and get it directly into our hand. So yeah, of course, that includes both of our enchantment alternative win conditions. But of course, outside of these tutors, we've got even more ways to dig down into our deck. And we're going to be running some fantastic looting effects like, Faithless Looting. Draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and we can flash it back. Again, keep in mind, getting cards into our graveyard can actually be a good thing again to meet that requirement on Happily Ever After. Because Happily Ever After doesn't care where those types of cards are, it just cares on, whether they're in play or in our graveyard, so discarding them can be a good way to meet that. While also, digging through our deck for either a tutor or, those alternative win conditions themselves. So we're also going to be running Tormenting Voice, which has discard 1 card to draw 2, and Thrill Possibility does the exact same thing but at instant speed. Next up, we've got 3 cards that all basically do the exact same thing with Big Score, Unexpected Windfall, and Pirate's Pillage. Discard 1 card to draw 2 and create 2 treasure tokens. So yeah, these cards can actually help temporarily ramp us or actually even meet that artifact requirement too. But next up, we've got Cathartic Reunion, which has discard 2 to draw 3, and Thrilling Discovery, which does the exact same thing, but we also gain 2 life. So again, ways to get our life total up are going to be huge with Happily Ever After. So we're also going to be running Heartwarming Redemption, which says discard all the cards in our hand, then we draw that many cards plus 1, and we gain life equal to the number of cards in our hand. And speaking of drawing a lot of cards though, there's Magus of the Wheel, which we can pay 1 in a red to tap and sacrifice it, and each player discards all of their cards in their hand, and they draw 7 cards. So this can be a great way to fill our graveyard, and yeah, even just filling it with a creature like Magus the Wheel can help us out too. Next up, we've got another Planeswalker, like our commander, that can help us out with that requirement as well with Nahiri the Harbinger. Nahiri has a +2, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card, a -2 exile target enchantment, tapped artifact, or tapped creature, and a -8 that's going to say, search your library for an artifact or creature card, put on the battlefield, and shuffle your library. It gains haste, return to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. And finally, we've got an enchantment that can help us out as well with Monastery Siege. When it enters the battlefield, we choose either Khans or Dragons. If we choose Khans at the beginning of our draw step, we loot, and then if we choose Dragons, spells our opponents cast that target us or a permanent we control costs 2 more to cast, so kind of like Ward 2, which of course can help us out with keeping Heavily Thereafter in play. But of course, although we've talked about a lot of ways to draw cards, we're not done just yet. So we're also going to be running Momentous Fall, which can help us draw an absurd amount of cards and gain an absurd amount of life. As the initial cost to cast a spell, we sacrifice a creature, and we draw cards equal to its power and gain life equal to its toughness. Again, if we can get one of our Kavu to be quite large, we can gain a ton of life and draw a lot of cards with this. Or if we can go wide with our Kavu and get them some power as well, we've got Shamanic Revelation, which says draw a card for each creature you control, and if we've got, creatures with power 4 or greater, we gain a lot of life too. You gain 4 life for each creature controlled power 4 or greater. And then Glorious Sunrise actually gives us some options. It says beginning of combat on your turn, choose 1. Creatures you control get +1 and gain trample until end of turn. Target land gains tap, add green until end of turn. Draw a card if you control a creature power 3 or greater, or you gain 3 life. Of course, each of these in this stack can be great options for what we want to do. Next up, we also have some ways to get some cards back, like, if Happily Ever After gets dealt with, we want to be able to get it back. So yeah, Regrowth and Naya Charm and Planewide Celebration can really help us out with that. Regrowth can get any card from our graveyard back to our hand. Naya Charm can do that, or it can do other things. It can deal 3 damage to our creature, or we can tap all creatures target player controls. And then Planewide Celebration is also very flexible. It says choose 4, you may choose the same mode more than once. Create a 2/2 citizen creature token that's all colors. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Proliferate, or you gain 4 life. So this can actually, again, make us a citizen that's all colors, so it can actually kind of meet that same requirement that the Kavu do if we're not making Kavu. It can get us permanents back from our graveyard, including Happily Ever After. It can help us proliferate to make our Kavu bigger, or we can just gain a lot of life with this. If we choose that one, we gain 16 life. Or what I mean, is if you choose that same one 4 times. Regardless, very flexible. But speaking of some big plays, how about Invincible Hymn, which says count the number of cards in your library. Your life total becomes that number. This can be just a one-shot way to gain an absurd amount of life and to set our life total to a point where we can easily meet that Happily Ever After requirement. And speaking of meeting a requirement, well, Knight of New Alara can meet the requirement that our Kavu can become incredibly deadly. It says each other multicolor creature you control gets +1 for each of its colors, so yeah, all those Kavu just immediately get a +5/+5, which of course can help us meet that Miles Aria requirement even easier. Speaking of which, how about Sunscorched Regent, which helps out in multiple ways. A 4/3 flying dragon that says whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a +1 counter on Sunscorched Regent, and you gain 1 life. So this can gain us a ton of life throughout the game, getting that life total up, and also again, with Miles Area, we can actually get this to quite a powerful creature as well, even up to 20 power to win with that. On top of just being able to smack our opponents for a ton with this. And speaking of counters and getting even more counters on our things, how about Lysel? And as if you put 1 or more counters on a creature or planeswalker you control or on yourself, put that many +1 of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent player instead. So this can get even more counters on our Kavu, and actually even more counters on Jared as well when we need to. And speaking of getting even more counters on our Kavu, how about Solidarity of Heroes, which is going to double the number of counters on target creature, and we can strive it for an extra 1 and a green. So yeah, this can of course make our Kavu even deadlier, and yeah, again with Miles Area, it can help us get to that 20 power requirement. Speaking of which, there's Fractal Harness, which has when it enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, put X counters on it, and attach Fractal Harness to it. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, you double the number of counters on it. Now that Fractal can definitely get to the amount that we need, or you just put this on one of the Kavu, and they can just start doubling up their counters very quickly. But now that we've talked about our plans quite a bit, what are some ways that we can throw wrenches into our opponent's plans? First up, how about something like Inscription of Abundance, which can help us out in multiple ways? It says choose one, but if it was kicked, we choose any number instead. We can get 2 counters on a creature. Target player gains X life or X the greatest power among creatures they control, or we can make target creature we control fight target creature we don't control. So this can be a great removal spell, a great way to gain life, or a great way to make a creature even larger. Speaking of flexible, there's Knight of Autumn, which says when enters the battlefield, choose one, put 2 counters on it, destroy target artifact or enchantment, or you gain 4 life. And then Arnie Slays the Troll is a saga that can help us out as well. Its first lore counter is target creature you control fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Again, our Kavu are going to be quite large, so good luck to our opponent's creatures. Its second lore counter is going to give us a red, and it's going to get 2 counters on up to 1 target creature we control, and its third lore counter is that we're going to gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So this little saga can actually do a lot for us. Next up, we can also cycle away Wilt and Forsake the Worldly if we need to get an instant to our graveyard and we need to draw a card, or we can utilize them to destroy an artifact or enchantment with Wilt, or exile one of them with Forsake the Worldly. And in a somewhat weird way, Beast Within can actually help us out with 2 of the requirements for Happily Ever After, or should I say 2 of 1 of the requirements? You know what I mean. Anyways, destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. So this can be an instant in our graveyard, of course, and also make us a creature. Or, we can use that on an opponent's permanent too. So yeah, there's that. Next up, there's Deafening Clarion, which says choose one or both. It's going to deal 3 damage to each creature, or creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So this can be a great way to take out some small creatures, and of course also to give our creatures lifelink so we can gain a ton of life with this all at once. Next up, there's Chroma's Vengeance, which we can cycle away if we need to, or can destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. And then Cleansing Nova says choose one, destroy all creatures, or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. And Austere Command is the most flexible of all these. Choose 2, destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures converted mana cost 3 or less, destroy all creatures converted mana cost 4 or greater. So this can be really flexible and help us out in a lot of scenarios. But speaking of helping us out, we're also going to be running some ways to protect our game plan with cards like Blacksmith Skill, Temio Safekeeping, and Flicker of Fate. Blacksmith Skill is going to give target permanent, hexproof, and indestructible until end of turn. And, well, if it's an artifact creature, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn, but yeah, that doesn't really matter. What does matter is that this can be a great way to protect one of our win conditions. Speaking of which, there's Temio Safekeeping, which says target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You gain 2 life. So again, this can protect Happily Ever After very easily and also gain us some life to help us get to that life requirement. Whereas Flicker of Fate can help as well with that. It can exile targeted creature or enchantment and then return to the battlefield under its own control. So yeah, we can blink Happily Ever After, gain us 5 more life and draw a card. And yeah, if someone's trying to actually target Happily Ever After, this can be a great way to save it. And of course, we also have some counter spells that can upset as well with that, with Negate, which can counter target non-creature spell, and Is It Charm, which is pretty flexible. Counter target non-creature spell, its controller pays 2. It can deal 2 damage to target creature, or we can draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the lands. First up, we got Command Tower, which can tap for any of our colors, Exotic Words, which can do so most of the time, and Path of Ancestry, which can tap for any of our colors but enters the battlefield tapped. And then we've got Ash Barrens, which we can basic land cycle away, and Evolving Wilds, Timberwolf Expansible, which we can tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. And then we've got 3 lands that can actually help ramp us with Crows and Verge, Mirror Landscape, and Blighted Woodland. Moving on, we're going to be running a ton of artifact lands, all of which come into play tapped, are indestructible, and can tap for one of our 2 colors, and they are Dark Moss, Frostforge, Goldmire, Mist Vault, Razor Tide, Rust Veil, Silver Bluff, Slag Woods, Thorn Glint, and Tanglepool Bridge. So these being artifact lands can of course help us meet that requirement on Happily Ever After, at least in 2 of the parts. And to round out our deck that we are running, basic lands with plains, swamps, forests, mountains, and islands. But now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, every single card in this deck, including the commander, is less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly deck at $34.56 as an estimated cost. And actually, that estimated cost does include basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those basics, there's some extra savings for you there. And speaking of potential extra savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again, and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.